The wind howled through the gaps in the wooden walls like a wounded animal, carrying with it the promise of another merciless Wyoming winter. Clara Hartwell pulled her worn shawl tighter around her shoulders and added another log to the dying fire, watching the sparks dance up the chimney before vanishing into the darkness. Outside, snow had already begun to blanket the desolate landscape, turning her small ranch into an island of solitude in an ocean of white. She moved to the frost-covered window and wiped a small circle clear with her sleeve, peering out at the barn where the few remaining cattle huddled together for warmth. 3 months. It had been 3 months since she'd buried Thomas in the frozen ground behind the hill. 3 months since a bullet had stolen away the man who'd promised her a future in this unforgiving territory. Clara's fingers found the small daguerreotype on the mantel. Thomas in his Sunday best, looking stern and proper as was the fashion. She traced his features with a work-roughened fingertip, remembering how different he'd looked that last morning, blood spreading across his shirt like spilled ink on parchment. The dispute had been about water rights, or so Ransom Boyd had claimed. The wealthy rancher owned most of the valley, and what he didn't own, he coveted. Thomas had refused to sell their modest 160 acres, refused to be driven off by threats and intimidation. His stubbornness had cost him his life, though the sheriff had ruled it self-defense when Boyd's men claimed Thomas had drawn first. Clara knew better. Thomas had many faults, but he was no fool. He would never have challenged 3 armed men alone. She set the photograph down and moved to check the larder, taking inventory of her dwindling supplies. 2 sacks of flour, some salt pork, dried beans, and precious little else. The general store in town extended no credit to widows, especially those without male kin to vouch for them. Thomas's family back east had written exactly once after his death, a terse letter suggesting she sell the ranch and return to civilization where a woman belonged. The very thought made her jaw clench. Return to what? To be a burden on relatives who'd made it clear she wasn't welcome? To work in some factory until her fingers bled? Or worse, to remarry out of desperation to any man who'd have a widow with no dowry? No. This land was bought with Thomas's sweat and blood. She'd not surrender it to satisfy the greed of men like Boyd or the expectations of proper society. The storm intensified as evening deepened into night. Clara had just settled into her chair by the fire with some mending when she heard it, a sound that didn't belong to the wind. Hoofbeats, labored and uneven, approaching the house. Her hand found the Winchester propped against the wall, and she checked the load with practiced efficiency. Living alone had taught her caution. Good intentions rarely came calling after dark in a blizzard. The hoofbeats stopped. A moment later, a fist pounded against her door. Heavy, desperate. "Please," a man's voice called out, barely audible above the storm. "My horse is done for, just needs shelter from the storm." Clara moved to the door but didn't open it. "Who are you? What's your business?" "Name's Creed. Eli Creed. Got turned around in the whiteout. My horse stepped in a hole. Think her legs broke." The voice was deep, rough with cold and exhaustion. "I mean no harm, ma'am. Just need to wait out the storm." Clara hesitated. Christian charity warred with self-preservation. She'd heard tales of men who preyed on isolated homesteads, especially those defended only by women. But she'd also heard stories of travelers found frozen solid, their last expressions a testament to winter's cruelty. "You armed?" she called through the door. "Colt revolver, Winchester in my saddle scabbard." "I'll leave them on the porch if that's your preference, ma'am." The fact that he offered spoke in his favor. Clara made her decision. "Leave the guns outside. Step back from the door where I can see you through the window." She heard the heavy thud of weapons being laid on the porch boards, then footsteps retreating. Through the small window beside the door, she could make out a tall figure standing in the swirling snow, hands raised and empty. He wore a long duster coat crusted with ice, and a hat pulled low against the wind. Clara unbarred the door and opened it, keeping her rifle leveled. Inside, slowly, the man stepped into the light, and Clara got her first clear look at him. He was lean and weathered, with several days' worth of stubble darkening his jaw. Ice crystals clung to his eyebrows and lashes, and his lips were blue with cold. But it was his eyes that caught her attention, gray as winter sky and holding a weariness that went deeper than physical exhaustion. He stood dripping on her floor, making no sudden movements. "I'm grateful, ma'am. Would have died out there." "Maybe you still will," Clara said, not lowering the rifle. "Sit in that chair by the table. Keep your hands where I can see them." He complied without complaint, sinking into the wooden chair with obvious relief. Clara noticed how his hands trembled, from cold or exhaustion. She couldn't tell. "When did you last eat?" The question surprised her as much as it seemed to surprise him. "Yesterday morning. I think maybe the day before. Gets hard to tell in weather like this." Against her better judgment, Clara felt a stirring of sympathy. She knew hunger, knew how it gnawed at your belly and clouded your thinking, keeping the rifle within reach. She ladled some leftover stew from the pot by the fire and set it before him with a chunk of day-old bread. He looked up at her with those gray eyes. "Thank you kindly." Clara watched him eat, slowly at first, then with increasing appetite. He had good manners, she noticed, despite his rough appearance. When he finished, he pushed the bowl away and met her gaze. "I can sleep in the barn if you'd prefer. Wouldn't want to cause you discomfort." "Barn's colder than a grave." Clara heard herself say, "You can bed down by the fire, but I'll be keeping this rifle close, and I'm a light sleeper. We understand each other?" "Yes, ma'am, crystal clear." She fetched him a blanket and a moth-eaten buffalo robe, then retreated to her small bedroom. Barring the door from inside, she lay fully clothed on the narrow bed, rifle beside her and a skinning knife beneath her pillow. Through the thin walls, she could hear him settling by the fire, the occasional pop of burning wood the only sound besides the relentless wind. Sleep eluded her. Every small noise made her tense, waiting for the creak of a floorboard that would signal betrayal. But the hours passed with nothing more threatening than the storm's fury and the stranger's occasional cough. When gray dawn finally filtered through the windows, Clara emerged to find him exactly where she'd left him, curled beneath the buffalo robe. He stirred at the sound of her door, sitting up slowly and running a hand through dark hair shot with premature silver. "Morning, ma'am. Storm still blowing fierce." Clara looked out the window at the white wall of snow. Travel would be impossible for days. She was trapped here with this stranger, this Eli Creed who wore his solitude like a second coat. "Suppose you'll be staying a while longer then," she said, trying to keep the resignation from her voice. "I can work for my keep," he offered. "Saw your wood piles getting low? I'm handy with an axe. Can tend to stock, mend fences, whatever needs doing." Clara studied him, weighing risks and necessities. The ranch did need work, more than she could manage alone. And if his intentions were dark, he'd had all night to act on them. "All right," she said finally. "But same rules apply. You keep your distance, do as I say, and we'll get along fine. Cross me, and you'll find I'm a good shot even in a blizzard." Something that might have been a smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Wouldn't expect anything less, ma'am." And so began the strange dance of two wounded souls sharing space while the winter wind howled its lonely song outside, each guarding secrets and sorrows that cut deeper than any Wyoming cold. The storm raged for 3 days, turning the world beyond Clara's windows into a featureless white void. On the 4th morning, weak sunlight finally broke through the clouds, revealing drifts that reached halfway up the barn doors. The temperature had plummeted during the night, leaving frost flowers blooming on every surface and turning breath into clouds of vapor. Clara found Eli already awake, coaxing life back into the dying fire. He'd kept his distance as promised, never venturing beyond the main room except to use the privy, always announcing his movements so as not to startle her. "Water trough's frozen solid," he said without looking up from the flames. "I'll need to break the ice so the stock can drink." She watched him work, noting the economy of his movements, the way he conserved energy like a man accustomed to hardship. "There's an axe in the barn," she offered. "Mind the handle, it's loose." He nodded and pulled on his still damp boots, wincing slightly. Clara noticed the worn soles, the careful patches that spoke of too many miles with too little money. "Thomas's boots might fit you," she heard herself say. "No use in them gathering dust." Eli's gray eyes met hers, something flickering in their depths. "That's kind, ma'am, but I couldn't—" "It's practical, not kind." Clara cut him off, uncomfortable with the softness that had crept into her voice. "Can't have you losing toes to frostbite." "You'd be no use then." She fetched the boots from the bedroom, sturdy work boots that Thomas had barely broken in before his death. Eli accepted them with a quiet, obliged, and pulled them on. They fit well enough. The day settled into a rhythm of necessary tasks, while Eli attacked the frozen water trough with the axe. Clara ventured to the barn to check on their meager livestock. 3 cows and an aging draft horse named Moses comprised her entire herd. The chickens had long since been eaten or traded for supplies. The barn was warmer than outside, but still cold enough to see her breath. The cows lowed mournfully, their water bucket frozen solid. Hay was running low. Another month of winter, and she'd have to make hard choices about which animals to keep. "Let me." Eli's voice came from behind her. She hadn't heard him enter. He took the pitchfork from her hands and began distributing hay with practiced efficiency. "You're favoring your right side. Old injury." Clara stiffened. She hadn't realized her movements had betrayed the deep bruise along her ribs, where Boyd's man had shoved her against a fence post last month, warning her about the consequences of stubbornness. "It's nothing," she said curtly. Eli didn't press, but she caught him watching her from the corner of his eye as they worked. Together. They mucked stalls and spread fresh straw, their breath mingling in the cold air. The silence between them was oddly companionable, broken only by the animals' occasional sounds and the scrape of tools against wood. By midday, they'd retreated to the relative warmth of the house. Clara set about making a meal from their limited stores, a thin soup of beans and salt pork that would have to suffice. Eli had stacked an impressive pile of split wood by the door, enough to last several days. "You've done this before," she observed, ladling soup into bowls. "Done a lot of things before," he replied, accepting his portion with a grateful nod. They ate in silence, but Clara found herself stealing glances at him. His hands were scarred and capable, his movements deliberate. There was a stillness about him that reminded her of deep water, calm on the surface, but with currents running beneath. That evening, as purple shadows stretched across the snow, Clara attempted to darn a sock by lamplight. The hole seemed to grow larger with each pass of her needle, frustration mounting with every failed stitch. "May I?" Eli gestured to the sock. Pride warred with practicality. "You darn socks?" "Army teaches a man all sorts of skills." He took the sock and needle, his large hands surprisingly deft as he wove the thread back and forth. "Cavalry regiment. Learned to mend what I had or go without." "Which regiment?" Clara asked, curiosity overcoming caution. His hand stilled for a moment. 7th, under Custer for a time. Before. He didn't finish the sentence. Clara knew about Custer, about Little Bighorn. Every soul in the territories did, but Eli had said before, which meant he'd left before that final, fatal charge. She wondered what had driven a man to abandon his post, knowing the penalty for desertion. "I had my reasons," he said quietly, as if reading her thoughts. "Not proud of it, but I'd do it again." The sock was finished, neat and sturdy. He handed it back and retreated to his spot by the fire, pulling out a small knife and a piece of wood. Clara watched as he began to whittle, long strokes revealing the hidden shape within the grain. The next days passed in similar fashion. The weather remained brutal, temperatures so low that exposed skin would freeze in minutes. They developed an unspoken routine, Eli handling the heavier outdoor work while Clara maintained the house and prepared meals. Sometimes they worked together, repairing a broken stall door or patching holes where the wind whistled through. One afternoon, Clara discovered him in the barn, patiently working with Moses. The old draft horse had developed a limp, and Eli was carefully examining the hoof. Stone bruise, he diagnosed. Need to soak it. Keep him off it for a few days. Clara watched as he heated water and prepared a poultice, his hands gentle despite their size. Moses, normally skittish around strangers, stood quietly under his touch. "You have a way with horses," she said. "Easier than people," Eli replied, not looking up. "Horses are honest. They don't pretend to be something they're not." That night, the wind picked up again, rattling the windows in their frames. Clara had finally trusted him enough to leave her bedroom door unbarred, though the rifle remained within reach. She was awakened by a sound that made her blood run cold, a wordless cry of anguish from the main room. She found Eli thrashing in his blankets, caught in the grip of some nightmare. His face was contorted, sweat beading on his forehead despite the cold. "No," he muttered. "Not the children. God, not the—" Without thinking, Clara knelt beside him and touched his shoulder. "Mr. Creed, Eli, wake up." His eyes snapped open, wild and unseeing. For a moment, he looked through her as if she were a ghost. Then recognition dawned, and something like shame replaced the terror. "I'm sorry," he said hoarsely. "I didn't mean to—" "Hush," Clara said, surprising herself with the gentleness in her voice. "We all have demons that visit in the night." She fetched him a cup of water, noting how his hands shook as he drank. They sat in silence by the dying fire, two souls awake in the deep winter night. "Sand Creek," he said finally, so quietly she almost missed it. "That's what I see, what I can't forget." Clara knew about Sand Creek, the massacre of peaceful Cheyenne. Women and children cut down by soldiers. The official reports had called it a battle, but the whispered stories told a different truth. "You were there." "I was there." The words seemed pulled from him like splinters. "Followed orders, did things that—" He stopped, unable or unwilling to continue. Clara thought of her own nightmares, of finding Thomas's body in the snow, of the smirk on Boyd's face at the funeral. Different demons, but demons all the same. The past is a heavy load, she said quietly. Sometimes all we can do is carry it best we can. Eli looked at her then, really looked at her, and she felt seen in a way that made her want to retreat. But she held his gaze, and something passed between them in that moment, an understanding that went beyond words. The next morning brought a brief break in the weather. Eli ventured out to check the property lines, insisting that fences needed inspection after such storms. Clara knew he was giving her space, time to process the intimacy of the night before. She used the solitude to take stock of more than just supplies. This stranger had been in her home for over a week now, and the sharp edge of her wariness had begun to dull. His presence was starting to feel less like an intrusion and more like— She didn't have words for what it was becoming. When he returned, his face was grim. "Found tracks," he said. 3 riders, circling the property. Recent, since the last snowfall. Clara's heart sank. She knew who it would be. Boyd's men, checking to see if she'd survived the storm, if she was still clinging to what they wanted. "They'll be back," she said, more statement than question. "Most likely." Eli agreed. He paused, seeming to weigh his words. "I could move on when the weather breaks. Might be safer for you." The thought of facing Boyd's men alone again made her stomach clench. But more than that, the thought of this quiet house returning to its former emptiness felt unbearable. "You'll work through the winter," she heard herself say. "Room and board for help with the ranch. After that, we'll see." Something shifted in Eli's expression. Surprise, perhaps, or gratitude. "All right then," he said simply. That night, Clara made biscuits to go with their meager supper, using some of the carefully hoarded flour. It was a small extravagance, but the way Eli's face softened at the gesture made it worthwhile. They ate in companionable silence while the wind howled outside. 2 damaged souls sharing warmth against the cold, dark night. The February thaw came unexpectedly, turning the frozen landscape into a muddy mess of slush and running water. Clara stood at the kitchen window, watching Eli work on the broken water pump that had plagued her since autumn. His sleeves were rolled up despite the chill, revealing forearms corded with muscle and marked by old scars. "Pass me that wrench," he called, not looking up from his work. Clara handed him the tool, their fingers brushing briefly. She pulled back as if burned, disturbed by the warmth that simple touch ignited. 3 weeks he'd been here now, and the careful distance she'd maintained was becoming harder to preserve. "There," Eli said with satisfaction as water began flowing freely from the pump. "Should hold through spring at least." "I'm obliged," Clara said formally, but her eyes betrayed her, lingering on the satisfied smile that transformed his usually solemn features. That evening, they prepared supper together for the first time. It had started practically. Clara's hands were stiff from mending harnesses, and Eli had simply stepped in to help. Now they moved around the small kitchen with surprising synchronization, as if they'd been doing this dance for years. "My mother used to make cornbread like this," Eli said, mixing batter in a wooden bowl. "Added a touch of molasses when we could afford it." "Where was home?" Clara asked, slicing the last of their salt pork. "Ohio, originally, farm country." His hands stilled for a moment. "Haven't been back since before the war." Clara understood the weight of unspoken words. Home became a different thing when you'd seen what they'd both seen, done what survival demanded. "I grew up in Missouri," she offered. "Met Thomas at a church social. He had plans to come west, make something of himself." She gave a bitter laugh. "Guess he did, in a way. Made himself dead." "That's harsh," Eli said quietly. "Truth often is." Clara turned away, busying herself with the fire. "He was a good man, just not good at reading people. Thought everyone was as honest as he was." They ate their simple meal as darkness fell, the kitchen warm and lamp-lit against the night. Clara found herself talking more than she had in months, telling Eli about the daily struggles of keeping the ranch afloat, the suspicious looks in town, the way Thomas's family had written her off like a bad debt. "His brother sent a letter," she said, anger creeping into her voice. "Said a woman had no business trying to run a ranch alone. Offered to buy me a train ticket back east, like I was some charity case. But you stayed. This is my home now." Clara said fiercely, "I've bled for this land, buried my husband in it. I'll not be driven off by harsh weather or harsh men." Eli nodded slowly. "I understand that. The need to stand your ground, even when standing costs everything." After supper, they sat by the fire as had become their custom. Eli worked on a piece of harness that needed mending while Clara read from her small collection of books. The comfortable silence was broken only by the pop of burning wood and the occasional turn of a page. "Would you read aloud?" Eli asked suddenly. "Been a long time since I heard words meant for more than just getting by." Clara looked up, surprised. "You don't read?" "I can read," he said, a touch of pride in his voice. "Just haven't had much cause to lately. Books aren't common on the trail." She began reading from Ecclesiastes, her voice soft in the firelight. "To everything there is a season, and a time to every purpose under heaven." When she glanced up, Eli's eyes were closed, his face peaceful, not asleep, but listening with an intensity that made her voice falter. She continued reading until her throat grew dry, aware of him in a way that set her nerves singing. The next morning brought visitors. Clara was gathering eggs when she heard horses approaching. Her heart hammered as she recognized the riders, 3 of Boyd's men, including his foreman, Jake Morrison. "Morning, Mrs. Hartwell," Morrison called, touching his hat with mock courtesy. "Come to check on our neighbor. Worried you might not have survived that last storm." "As you can see, I'm fine," Clara replied, acutely aware of the rifle leaning against the chicken coop, just out of reach. "All alone out here," another man said, dismounting despite her lack of invitation. "That's dangerous for a woman. All sorts of accidents could happen." "I manage," Clara said coldly. Morrison's eyes traveled over the property, noting the repaired fence, the fresh woodpile. "Seems you've had help. That wouldn't be some drifter we heard about in town?" Before Clara could answer, Eli emerged from the barn, moving with that dangerous quietness she'd come to recognize. He carried a pitchfork, but the way he held it suggested other uses than moving hay. "Gentlemen," he said mildly, "something we can help you with?" Morrison's hand drifted toward his gun. "Don't recall asking for your opinion. Stranger, don't recall giving one." Eli replied, "Just asked a question." The tension stretched tight as wire. Clara saw Eli shift his weight slightly, saw Morrison notice it too. These were dangerous men, but something in Eli's stillness suggested he might be more dangerous still. "Mr. Boyd wants to make another offer on the property," Morrison said finally, addressing Clara but keeping his eyes on Eli. "Generous offer, more than generous, considering—" "Considering what?" Clara asked. "Considering your situation? Widow woman, no family, no prospects? Winter's not half over. Lot can happen between now and spring. Is that a threat?" Eli's voice had gone soft in a way that raised the hair on Clara's neck. Morrison smiled unpleasantly. "Just stating facts. Mrs. Hartwell's husband learned about facts the hard way." Something shifted in Eli's expression, subtle but unmistakable. The lazy stance vanished, replaced by coiled readiness. "Think it's time you gentlemen moved along." "You giving orders on Mrs. Hartwell's property?" Morrison challenged. "I work for Mrs. Hartwell," Eli said. "Part of that work is seeing that trash doesn't pile up around the place. Now ride on." For a moment, violence hung in the air like smoke. Then Morrison laughed, though his eyes remained cold. "We'll be back with that offer, Mrs. Hartwell. Hope you'll be more reasonable by then." They mounted and rode off. But Clara didn't relax until they were specks in the distance. Her hands were trembling, and she hated herself for the weakness. "They killed him," she said quietly. "Thomas made it look like self-defense, but they killed him sure as I'm standing here." "I know," Eli said simply. She looked at him sharply. "How could you know?" "Way they talked about it. Men don't gloat over justified killings." He set the pitchfork aside. "They'll be back. They always come back," Clara said bitterly. That night, she couldn't settle. The visit had stirred up memories better left buried. Thomas's last morning, the way he'd kissed her forehead before riding out, the hours of waiting that turned to days. The sheriff's awkward words when he finally came. She found Eli sitting on the porch despite the cold, keeping watch. "You should sleep," she said, wrapping her shawl tighter. "Not tired." He shifted to make room for her on the bench. "Nice night. Stars are clear." Clara sat carefully, maintaining a proper distance. The night was indeed beautiful. The sky a vault of diamonds against black velvet. "I wasn't a good wife," she said suddenly, the words surprising her. "I tried, but Thomas wanted something I couldn't give, some softness I didn't have in me." "Maybe he should have loved what you did have instead of mourning what you didn't," Eli said quietly. The words hit her like a physical blow. She turned to look at him, finding his gray eyes already on her, steady and understanding. "That's a dangerous thought, Mr. Creed." "Truth often is," he said, echoing her earlier words. They sat in silence, the space between them charged with unspoken things. Clara felt herself swaying toward him, drawn by a magnetism she didn't want to name. Then reason reasserted itself, and she stood abruptly. "Good night," she said, fleeing inside before she could do something foolish. But sleep brought no peace. She dreamed of gray eyes and scarred hands, of safety that felt more dangerous than any threat. When dawn came, she rose exhausted and confused, her carefully ordered world tilting on its axis. Eli was already up, tending the stock as if nothing had changed, but when their eyes met across the barnyard, Clara saw her own uncertainty reflected back. Whatever was growing between them had taken root too deep to easily tear out. That afternoon, while Clara worked on the ranch accounts, Eli appeared in the doorway, holding something behind his back. "Made something," he said awkwardly. "Nothing fancy." He produced a small wooden figure, a horse, carved with patient skill. The detail was remarkable, from the flowing mane to the proud arch of neck. "It's beautiful." Clara breathed, cradling the figure carefully. Thought you might like it. Reminds me of that mare you mentioned, the one you had to sell last fall. Clara's throat tightened. She had mentioned Buttercup only once, in passing. That he'd remembered, that he'd spent hours creating this small comfort for her. Thank you, she managed. Their fingers touched as she took the carving, and this time neither pulled away. The moment stretched between them, fragile as spun glass. Then Eli cleared his throat and stepped back. Better check on that fence line, he said roughly, and was gone before Clara could respond. She stood holding the wooden horse, feeling the warmth of his hands still in the wood, and wondered how a heart so carefully guarded could suddenly feel so exposed. The sound of approaching horses jolted Clara from her mending. Through the window, she saw a lone rider approaching, not Boyd's men this time, but Henry Paulson, the town lawyer. Her stomach clenched with fresh dread. Mrs. Hartwell, Paulson called, his thin face pinched with what might have been sympathy or discomfort. I'm afraid I bring unfortunate news. Clara stepped onto the porch, noting how Eli materialized from the barn, silent as always when trouble appeared. State your business. Mr. Paulson. The lawyer dismounted, pulling papers from his saddlebag. Mr. Boyd has filed a claim disputing your property boundaries. He says your husband agreed to adjusted lines before his passing. That's a lie, Clara said flatly. Nevertheless, there's to be a hearing. You'll need to appear before Judge Watson next month. Paulson handed her the papers, not meeting her eyes. You might consider accepting Mr. Boyd's offer. These legal matters can be complicated for a woman alone. The lady said it was a lie. Eli's voice came from behind Clara, quiet but carrying an edge that made Paulson step back. I'm simply delivering documents, the lawyer said hastily. Good day, Mrs. Hartwell. After he'd gone, Clara sank onto the porch step, the papers crumpling in her fist. Thomas kept all the records in order. The boundaries are clear, been surveyed proper, but Judge Watson and Boyd play cards together every Friday. Then we'll find another way, Eli said, settling beside her. We? Clara looked at him sharply. This isn't your fight. Maybe not, he agreed, but I've seen enough wrong in this world. Don't care to watch more happen if I can help it. That evening, as Clara prepared supper with shaking hands, her mind churned over the impossibility of her situation. The pan slipped from her grip, clattering to the floor, and suddenly all the fear and fury she'd been holding back burst free. Damn him! She kicked the fallen pan, tears of rage streaming down her face. Damn Boyd and his greed and his murders and... Strong arms encircled her from behind, pulling her against a solid chest. Easy, Eli murmured. Easy now. Clara stiffened, then sagged against him, letting herself be held for the first time since Thomas died. Eli smelled of leather and wood smoke, of safety she couldn't afford to believe in. I can't lose this place, she whispered. It's all I have left. You won't, he said firmly. We'll figure something out. She turned in his arms, looking up at his weathered face. Why do you care? You could ride out tomorrow, leave this mess behind. His gray eyes searched hers. Maybe I'm tired of riding. Maybe I found something worth standing still for. The air between them crackled. Clara knew she should step away, knew this was dangerous territory. Instead, she reached up, her fingers tracing the scar that ran along his jaw. How did you get this? Shrapnel at Antietam. His voice had gone rough. Lucky it wasn't worse. And this one, her hand moved to his temple, where another scar disappeared into his hairline. Saloon fight in Abilene? Was protecting a working girl from rough handling? Always protecting people. Clara murmured, Not always. Eli said darkly, Not when it mattered most. Clara understood. They all had ghosts, failures that haunted the dark hours. But right now, in this moment, the past felt less important than the warm, solid presence of him. The way his hands splayed across her back like he was afraid she might disappear. Clara, he said, her name a question and a prayer. She answered by rising on her toes and pressing her lips to his. The kiss was tentative at first, then deeper as years of loneliness and need crashed over them both. Eli's arms tightened around her, and Clara felt herself melting into him, every carefully constructed wall crumbling. When they finally broke apart, both were breathing hard. Eli's eyes were dark with want, but he stepped back, giving her space. "I should check the horses," he said hoarsely. "Yes," Clara agreed, though every part of her screamed to pull him back. "You should!" He fled to the barn, leaving Clara to sink into a chair, fingers pressed to her lips. What had she done? What was she doing? Thomas had been dead barely 4 months, and here she was throwing herself at the first man to show her kindness. But it was more than kindness, and she knew it. It was the way Eli saw her, not as a helpless widow or a woman who needed managing, but as someone strong and capable. It was the quiet way he supported without taking over, the respect in his eyes even when she was difficult. That night, sleep eluded her entirely. She heard Eli moving restlessly by the fire and knew he was likewise afflicted. When she finally dozed near dawn, she dreamed of gray eyes and gentle hands, of being held like something precious. Morning brought a cold snap that turned breath to fog and left frost thick on every surface. Clara found Eli already up, splitting wood with violent energy. "We need to talk," she said. He paused mid-swing. "If you want me to leave." "No." The word came too quick, too desperate. Clara forced herself to breathe. "That's not... We need to talk about Boyd, about fighting back." Relief flickered across Eli's features before he schooled them back to neutrality. "What did you have in mind? Thomas might have kept other records. Proof Boyd's lying. But his office in town was ransacked after he died. If there's anything left, it might be with Sheriff McKenna." "McKenna's in Boyd's pocket," Eli pointed out. "Maybe. But his deputy, Jim Fletcher, was friends with Thomas. Might be worth talking to him." Eli nodded slowly. "I'll ride to town this afternoon." "We'll ride to town," Clara corrected. "This is my fight. It's dangerous. Everything's dangerous." Clara cut him off. "I'm done hiding on this ranch waiting for Boyd to pick his moment." They set out after the noon meal, Clara riding Moses while Eli had managed to trade work for the use of a neighbor's horse. The road to town was treacherous with ice, but Clara felt lighter than she had in weeks. Taking action, any action, was better than waiting. Elkhorn was typical of small Wyoming towns, one main street of false-fronted buildings, a few cross streets of houses and shops. They attracted stares as they rode in. The widow Hartwell with her mysterious hired man. Deputy Fletcher was at the jail, feet up on the desk. He scrambled upright when they entered. "Mrs. Hartwell, heard you had some trouble coming." "News travels fast," Clara said dryly. "Jim, I need to ask you something, and I need an honest answer. Did Thomas leave any papers with you? Anything about the ranch boundaries?" Fletcher glanced nervously at the door. "Sheriff's due back soon." "Jim," Clara said urgently, "you know Boyd's claim is false. You know what really happened to Thomas." The deputy's face crumpled. "I know a lot of things I can't prove, but..." He opened a drawer, pulling out a leather portfolio. "Thomas gave me this a week before he died. Said if anything happened, I should get it to you. I'm sorry I didn't come sooner. I was scared." Clara's hands shook as she opened the portfolio. Inside were surveyor's documents, signed and witnessed, clearly showing the ranch boundaries. More damning still was a letter in Boyd's own hand, offering to buy the water rights for a fraction of their worth, with a veiled threat about unfortunate accidents that might befall those who refused. "This is it," she breathed. "This proves everything." "Proves Boyd wanted your land," Fletcher said. "Don't prove he killed Thomas for it. It's enough to stop this claim." Eli said, "Maybe make Boyd think twice about pushing harder." They left quickly, Clara clutching the portfolio tight. But as they reached the horses, Jake Morrison stepped out of the saloon across the street, flanked by 2 of Boyd's other men. Well, Mrs. Hartwell and her guard dog, come to town." Morrison's eyes fixed on the portfolio. "What you got there?" "Nothing that concerns you," Clara said, trying to step around him. Morrison grabbed her arm. "Everything on Mr. Boyd's future property concerns me." Eli moved so fast Clara barely saw it. One moment Morrison was gripping her arm. The next, he was face down in the muddy street. Eli's knee in his back and his arm twisted at a painful angle. "Touch her again," Eli said quietly, "and I'll break it." The other men went for their guns, but Eli already had Morrison's pistol pressed to the foreman's head. I'd think careful on that. A crowd was gathering. Clara saw faces she knew, the minister's wife, the general store owner, neighbors who'd looked away after Thomas died, but now they were watching, witnessing. "You're making a mistake, stranger," Morrison gasped. "Made plenty of those." Eli agreed. "One more won't matter." Sheriff McKenna pushed through the crowd, hand on his gun. "What's the trouble here?" "No trouble," Eli said calmly. "Just explaining to Mr. Morrison about keeping his hands to himself." He released Morrison and stepped back. "Keeping the man's gun." Morrison struggled to his feet, face red with rage and humiliation. "Arrest him," Morrison demanded. McKenna looked between them, calculating. The crowd was growing, and Clara saw something shift in the sheriff's expression. Too many witnesses to simply do Boyd's bidding. "Looks like a misunderstanding," McKenna said finally. "Morrison, you and your boys move along." "This isn't over," Morrison snarled, but he and his men retreated. As the crowd dispersed, Clara found herself trembling with delayed reaction. Eli's hand touched her elbow gently. "You all right?" "Yes," she said, then more firmly. "Yes, let's go home." They rode back in silence, but it was a different silence than before, charged with possibility and the knowledge that they'd drawn a line in the sand. Whatever came next, they would face it together. That night, as Clara secured the precious documents in her bedroom, she heard Eli making his usual rounds, checking doors and windows. When he passed her doorway, she called out, "Eli?" He paused, silhouetted in the lamplight. "Yes? Thank you. For today. For everything." He was quiet for a long moment. "Get some rest. Clara, tomorrow we plan our next move." After he'd gone, Clara lay in the darkness, her arm still feeling the ghost of Morrison's grip, her lips still remembering Eli's kiss. Outside, wind rattled the windows like something trying to get in, but for the first time in months, she wasn't afraid. Dawn came gray and bitter cold, ice crystals forming on the inside of windows. Clara woke to find the fire had died in the night, leaving the house frigid. She pulled on her wrapper and hurried to the main room, only to find Eli already there, coaxing new flames from the embers. "Couldn't sleep?" she asked. He glanced up, and she saw the exhaustion etched in the lines around his eyes. "Kept thinking about yesterday. Morrison won't let that humiliation stand." "I know." Clara moved closer to the growing fire, holding her hands out to the warmth. "But we can't live in fear of what they might do." "No," Eli agreed, "but we can be ready for it." They worked through the morning in companionable silence, Clara tending to household tasks, while Eli reinforced the barn doors and checked their meager ammunition supplies. The familiar routine felt different now, charged with an undercurrent of anticipation that had nothing to do with Boyd or his threats. As Clara kneaded bread dough, she found herself watching Eli through the window as he worked with Moses, patiently coaxing the old horse through the icy yard. The careful way he moved, considerate of the animal's age and infirmities, made something warm bloom in her chest. "You're going to work a hole in that dough," Eli said from the doorway, startling her. Clara looked down to find she'd been kneading the same spot for who knows how long. Heat rushed to her cheeks. "Wool gathering, I suppose. Must have been some pleasant wool," he observed, a rare hint of teasing in his voice. Before Clara could respond, the sound of breaking glass shattered the moment. She spun toward the window to see smoke rising from the barn. "Fire!" She grabbed the water bucket, but Eli was already running. The barn's far wall was ablaze, flames licking up dried timber despite the cold. Clara could hear the animal's terrified cries from inside. Without hesitation, Eli plunged through the smoke-filled doorway. Clara followed, choking on the acrid air. She found Eli struggling with Moses's stall door, the old horse rearing in panic. The metal latch had warped in the heat. "Get the cows out!" Eli shouted over the roar of flames. Clara ran to the other stalls, throwing open doors and driving the bellowing cattle towards safety. The smoke was thick now, stinging her eyes and searing her lungs. She could hear Eli cursing as he fought with Moses's door. A timber crashed down, showering sparks. Clara's skirt caught fire, and she beat at it frantically with her hands. Then Eli was there, throwing her to the ground and rolling her in the dirt until the flames died. "Get out!" he ordered. But Clara saw Moses still trapped, eyes rolling white with terror. Together they attacked the warped door, Clara prying with a pitchfork while Eli put his shoulder to the wood. With a screech of metal, it finally gave way. Moses bolted free, nearly trampling them both in his panic to escape. They stumbled out into the clean air, coughing and gasping. Clara's hands were burned, her dress ruined, but they were alive. She turned to watch the barn collapse in a shower of sparks, taking with it their hay supply, tools, everything they'd worked to build. "Clara!" Eli's voice was strange. She turned to find him staring at her with an expression she'd never seen before, raw and unguarded. "When I saw your skirt catch fire." He pulled her against him roughly, burying his face in her smoke-stained hair. Clara clung to him, feeling the rapid beat of his heart against her cheek. "I'm all right," she whispered. "We're both all right." He pulled back just enough to look at her face, his thumb tracing her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. "I can't lose you," he said hoarsely. "Not when I just found you." The words hung between them, too honest to take back. Clara reached up, cupping his soot-streaked face in her burned hands. "You won't," she promised, and sealed it with a kiss that tasted of smoke and desperation and hope. When they finally drew apart, the barn was nothing but glowing embers. The animals huddled in the yard, Moses standing with his head low, sides heaving. Everything they'd stored for winter was gone. "Boyd's men," Clara said unnecessarily. "Saw the tracks leading away." Eli confirmed. 3 horses heading toward Boyd's spread. Clara surveyed the destruction, waiting for despair to crush her. Instead, she felt only a cold, clear anger. "Then we know where to find them." "Clara, no." She turned to face him. "I'm done being the victim. Done letting them chip away at everything Thomas and I built. If Boyd wants a war, he'll have one." That night, they made camp in the house's main room, bringing the animals into the lean-to addition for shelter. Clara treated Eli's burns with the same gentle efficiency he showed with hers, trying not to think about the intimacy of touching his skin, of having his hands on her. "We need help," Eli said as she wrapped his blistered palm. "Can't fight Boyd's outfit alone. Who would help us? The whole town's either scared of Boyd or on his payroll. Maybe not the whole town." Eli was quiet for a moment. "That minister's wife was watching pretty close yesterday. So were some others. Might be folks are tired of Boyd running things." Clara considered this. "Sarah Morrison, no relation to Jake. She's spoken kindly to me at church. And the Hendricks family. They had trouble with Boyd last year over water rights. It's a start." Eli agreed. They sat close together as the fire burned low, sharing the last of the whiskey Clara had hidden for medicinal purposes. The alcohol burned her throat but warmed her belly, making her bold. "Tell me about her," she said quietly. "The woman you left behind." Eli was silent so long she thought he wouldn't answer. Then, Mary. Her name was Mary. Minister's daughter in Ohio. Sweet, gentle thing. Thought she could save me with prayer and good intentions. "What happened?" "I came back from the war, different, angry, drinking. She tried, but..." He took another sip of whiskey. "Found her with another man, local shopkeeper who'd stayed home. Kept his hands clean. Can't say I blamed her." Clara studied his profile in the firelight. "Is that when you started drifting?" "Among other times." He turned to look at her. "What about you and Thomas? You loved him?" It was Clara's turn to be quiet. "I thought I did. He was steady, reliable, offered a future that seemed solid. She gave a bitter laugh. Turns out nothing's as solid as it seems. He was a fool, Eli said quietly. Any man who had you and didn't treasure every moment. Don't! Clara's voice was sharp. Don't make him into something he wasn't just because he's dead. We were comfortable, partners. But there was no fire. No. She gestured helplessly. No what? No this, she admitted, gesturing between them. No feeling like I can't breathe right when you're not near. No wanting to touch you so bad my hands ache with it. Eli made a sound low in his throat and pulled her onto his lap. Whiskey bottle forgotten. Clara went willingly, straddling him in a way that would have scandalized her proper upbringing. His hands tangled in her hair, pulling pins free until it tumbled around her shoulders. You're killing me, he groaned against her neck. Every day, watching you, wanting you, trying to be honorable. I don't want honorable, Clara interrupted, grinding against him in a way that made them both gasp. I want you. They came together with desperate hunger, hands roaming, mouths meeting in kisses that were more battle than caress. Clara had never felt such need, such wild abandon. When Eli lifted her, carrying her to the pile of blankets by the fire, she wrapped her legs around him and held on tight. Afterwards, they lay entwined, skin cooling in the night air. Clara traced the scars on Eli's chest, each one a story of survival. I should feel guilty, she murmured. Thomas not even a year gone. Don't. Eli caught her hand, bringing it to his lips. The dead have no claim on the living. You honored him while he lived. That's enough. Clara curled closer, feeling safer than she had since Thomas died. Maybe before that, if she was honest. What happens now? Now we survive. Eli said simply, together. And we make Boyd pay for everything he's taken. Outside, wind howled through the ruins of the barn, carrying the smell of smoke and destruction. But inside, wrapped in Eli's arms with the fire warming their naked skin, Clara felt only a fierce joy. Let Boyd come. She had something worth fighting for now, something worth living for. I love you, she whispered into the darkness, the words surprising her with their truth. Eli's arms tightened around her. And I love you. Clara Hartwell. God help us both. They made love again as dawn approached, slower this time, learning each other's rhythms and needs. When the sun finally rose on the devastation of their property, they faced it together, united in purpose and passion. The war with Boyd was far from over, but Clara no longer faced it alone. Whatever came next, she had Eli beside her, and that made all the difference. The morning after the fire, Eli saddled the neighbor's borrowed horse despite Clara's protests. I need to know what we're facing, he said, checking his colt. Boyd's escalating. Next time might be worse than a barn. Then I'm coming with you, Clara insisted. No. His voice was firm but gentle. Someone needs to stay with the animals, and if something happens to me... He didn't finish, but Clara heard the unspoken words. If he didn't come back, she'd need to be alive to fight another day. She watched him ride off with a knot of dread in her stomach. The hours crawled by as she tended the cows and Moses, now sheltered in the lean-to. Every distant sound made her heart race, expecting either Eli's return or Boyd's men coming to finish what they'd started. It was near dusk when she heard horses approaching. Multiple horses, moving fast. Clara grabbed the rifle and took position by the window, only to sag with relief when she recognized Eli's borrowed mount. But her relief turned to alarm when she saw him slumped in the saddle, another rider holding him upright. She rushed outside to find Jim Fletcher supporting Eli, whose shirt was dark with blood. Ambush, Fletcher explained tersely as they maneuvered Eli inside. Found him about 2 miles from Boyd's place. They were waiting for him. Clara's hands shook as she cut away Eli's shirt, revealing a bullet wound in his shoulder, still seeping blood. Why did you bring him here? She asked Fletcher while pressing cloth to the wound. Why help us? The deputy's face was grim. Because I'm tired of being a coward, tired of watching Boyd take whatever he wants while good people suffer. Clara worked with desperate efficiency. cleaning the wound with whiskey while Eli gritted his teeth against the pain. The bullet had passed through cleanly. A small mercy. "There's more," Fletcher said quietly. "Boyd's planning to move on you tomorrow night. Heard him talking to Morrison. They figure with your man wounded, you'll be easy pickings." "Let them come," Clara said fiercely, threading a needle with steady hands that belied her racing heart. Fletcher watched her stitch Eli's shoulder with surprising skill. "You can't fight off a dozen men, Mrs. Hartwell. Then we'll need help." Clara tied off the suture and met Fletcher's eyes. "You said you were tired of being a coward. Prove it. Help me rally others who feel the same." Fletcher was quiet for a long moment, then nodded slowly. "The Hendricks family might stand with you. And old Samuel Worth. Boyd cheated him on cattle prices last fall. Maybe a few others." "Go," Clara urged. "Talk to them. Tell them tomorrow night we make a stand." After Fletcher left, Clara sat beside Eli, bathing his fevered face with cool water. He drifted in and out of consciousness, occasionally muttering words she couldn't understand. Near midnight, his eyes opened, focusing on her with effort. "Clara," he whispered, "you need to run. Take Moses and—" "Hush," she said firmly. "I'm not going anywhere." "Stubborn woman," he managed, the ghost of a smile crossing his lips. "That's why you love me," Clara replied, squeezing his hand. "One of many reasons." His fingers tightened on hers. "Clara, if something happens—" "Nothing will happen," she interrupted. "You're going to be fine, and we're going to beat Boyd. And then we're going to rebuild that barn and raise horses and grow old together on this land." Eli's eyes searched hers. "Promise me something. If it goes bad tomorrow, you'll survive. Whatever it takes, you survive." Clara leaned down and kissed him softly. "We'll both survive. Together." The next day passed in a blur of preparations. Clara cleaned and loaded every weapon they had, barricaded windows, and tried to make Eli comfortable despite his protests that he should be helping. His fever had broken, but he was still weak, barely able to sit up without support. As evening approached, Clara heard horses again. Her heart leaped when she saw Fletcher returning with nearly a dozen riders. The Hendricks brothers, Samuel Worth and his 2 sons, Sarah Morrison and her husband, and others she recognized from town. "We're here to help Mrs. Hartwell," Sarah said, dismounting with a rifle in hand. "Boyd's pushed too many of us too far." Clara felt tears prick her eyes. "Thank you, all of you." They arranged their defense as darkness fell. Men took positions around the property while the women prepared medical supplies and ammunition. Eli insisted on being propped by a window with his rifle. Though Clara knew he could barely lift it, the waiting was agony. Every shadow could be an enemy, every sound a threat. Clara found herself beside Eli, their hands clasped tight. "Whatever happens," she whispered, "I'm glad I found you." "Best thing that ever happened to me," Eli replied. "Was getting lost in that blizzard." Then they came, dark shapes moving through the darkness. Boyd's men spreading out to surround the house. Clara counted at least 15 riders, more than their small band could hope to match. "Hold fire until they're close," Samuel Worth commanded quietly. "Make every shot count." Morrison's voice rang out from the darkness. "Last chance, Hartwell. Come out now, and we'll make it quick." "Go to hell," Clara shouted back. The night erupted in gunfire. Windows shattered as bullets flew from both sides. Clara fired and reloaded with mechanical precision, trying not to think about the fact that she was trying to kill men she'd seen in town, men with families of their own. One of Boyd's men tried to rush the porch and went down under concentrated fire. Another made it to the lean-to before one of the Hendricks brothers dropped him, the air filled with smoke and the acrid smell of gunpowder. "They're trying to flank us," someone shouted. Clara turned to see figures moving around the side of the house. She swung her rifle toward them, but Eli was already firing from his position, his face gray with pain, but his aim still true. The battle raged for what felt like hours, but was probably less than one. Then, sudden as it started, The firing from Boyd's men ceased. "Riders coming!" Fletcher called out. "Lots of them!" Clara's heart sank. Reinforcements for Boyd would end this quickly. But then she heard a voice she didn't expect. Sheriff McKenna, shouting for everyone to hold their fire. "This ends now!" McKenna bellowed. He rode into the yard, badge glinting in the moonlight, followed by a dozen men, including several federal marshals. "Morrison, Boyd, all of you, throw down your weapons!" "Since when do you give me orders?" Boyd himself emerged from the shadows, fury evident even in the darkness. "Since I got a visit from the Yonan Marshal's office," McKenna replied. "Seems they've been investigating reports of claim jumping and murder in this county. Your boy Morrison here made a mistake bragging in a saloon in Cheyenne. Federal witness heard everything about how you killed Thomas Hartwell." Clara felt her knees go weak with relief and exhaustion. Around the yard, Boyd's men were dropping their weapons, realizing the game was up. "This isn't over." Boyd snarled as the marshals placed him in shackles. You'll hang," McKenna interrupted. "For murder, conspiracy, and about a dozen other charges. It's over, Boyd." As Boyd and his men were led away, Clara found herself surrounded by neighbors offering congratulations and support. But she only had eyes for Eli, who had slumped against the window frame, fresh blood seeping through his bandages. "Just a scratch," he said weakly as she rushed to him. "Stubborn man," Clara murmured, tears streaming down her face as she held him. "That's why I love you." "One of many reasons," he echoed, managing a smile before passing out in her arms. The doctor from town worked through the night, treating wounded from both sides. Miraculously, none of their defenders had been killed, though several bore injuries that would leave lasting scars. Eli's shoulder wound had reopened but would heal with care and time, as dawn broke over the battlefield that had been her yard. Clara stood on the porch surveying the damage. The house was riddled with bullets, windows shattered, walls scarred, but it still stood. She had held her ground. "We did it," Sarah Morrison said, coming to stand beside her. "Boyd's finished. Things will be different now." Clara nodded, though she knew the fight wasn't truly over. There would be a trial, rebuilding to do, a life to forge with Eli. But for now, in this moment, she had won. The land Thomas had died for remained hers, and she had found something she never expected, a love worth fighting for, and a man willing to stand beside her no matter the cost. Inside the house, Eli stirred, calling her name. Clara went to him, ready to face whatever came next, together. The saloon in Elkhorn had never seen such a crowd on a Tuesday afternoon. Word of the confrontation had spread like wildfire, drawing folks from neighboring ranches and even from Cheyenne. At the center of it all stood Eli Creed, his left arm still in a sling but his gray eyes clear and determined. "Boyd's been bleeding this county dry for years." Eli addressed the gathered crowd, taking what he wants, killing those who stand against him. Thomas Hartwell was just one of many. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Clara watched from near the door, her heart swelling with pride and worry in equal measure. Eli had insisted on this public confrontation, despite still being weak from his wounds. Jake Morrison sat at a corner table, flanked by two federal marshals. His bravado had evaporated since Boyd's arrest, leaving him looking like what he was, a hired thug facing the noose. "You got nothing on me," Morrison snarled. "Boyd gave the orders. I just followed them." "That's not what you said in Cheyenne," Marshal Stevens interjected. He was a stern man with silver temples and eyes that missed nothing. "We have 3 witnesses who heard you bragging about shooting Thomas Hartwell in the back." The room went dead silent. Clara felt her fingernails digging into her palms, the familiar rage threatening to overwhelm her. All these months of believing Thomas had died facing his killers, and now to learn he'd been shot from behind like a coward's target. "Prove it," Morrison challenged, though his voice had lost its edge. "Already have." Stevens produced a signed affidavit. "Miss Ruby Dalton from the Silver Dollar Saloon. Seems you got drunk and talkative after visiting her establishment. She remembered every word." Morrison's face went pale. He looked around the room as if seeking escape, but there was none. The good people of Elkhorn, who had looked away for too long, now stared at him with undisguised contempt. "I want a deal," Morrison said desperately. "I'll tell you everything, about Boyd, about the others he's killed, about the judge he's been paying." "No deals." Eli's voice cut through the room like a blade. He moved forward, each step deliberate despite his injury. "You murdered an innocent man. You terrorized his widow. You burned our barn and tried to burn us with it. You'll hang for what you've done." Morrison lunged from his chair, desperation giving him strength. But Eli was ready, even wounded. His reflexes were sharp. He sidestepped Morrison's wild charge and brought his knee up hard into the man's stomach. Morrison collapsed, gasping. "Take him away," Stevens ordered. As the marshals dragged Morrison out, he turned to address the crowd. "Let this be a lesson. The law may be slow to arrive in these territories, but it does arrive. Any man thinking to follow in Boyd's footsteps should remember this day." After the marshals left with their prisoner, the saloon erupted in conversation. People who had been too frightened to speak before now shared stories of Boyd's tyranny, stolen cattle, diverted water, threats, and intimidation. Clara made her way to Eli's side. "You shouldn't have confronted him," she said quietly. "Your shoulder is fine," Eli interrupted, though she could see the pain lines around his eyes. "This needed doing. Clara, people needed to see Morrison fall, needed to know it's safe to speak truth again." Sheriff McKenna approached them, hat in hand. "Mrs. Hartwell, Mr. Creed, I owe you both an apology. I knew Boyd was dirty, but I was too yellow to stand against him. If I'd done my job proper, maybe Thomas would still be alive." Clara studied the sheriff's weathered face, seeing genuine remorse there. "What's done is done," she said finally. "What matters is what happens next." "What happens next is I do my job right," McKenna said firmly, "starting with making sure you folks get justice at the trial." As they left the saloon, Clara noticed how people nodded respectfully to them, some even tipping their hats. The widow Hartwell was no longer an object of pity or scorn, but someone who had stood her ground and won. Back at the ranch, Eli sank onto the porch steps with obvious relief. Clara sat beside him, noting how his hand trembled slightly. "You pushed too hard," she said, touching his forehead to check for fever. "Worth it," Eli replied, catching her hand and pressing it to his lips. Seeing Morrison's face when he realized he couldn't buy or threaten his way out, that was worth any pain. They sat in comfortable silence, watching the sun set over their land. The bullet holes in the house walls caught the golden light, testament to their survival. "There's something I need to tell you," Eli said quietly. "About Sand Creek, about why I really left the Army." Clara waited, sensing this was something he needed to say in his own time. Orders came down to attack Black Kettle's village, peaceful Cheyenne who'd already surrendered, flying the American flag over their lodges. His voice was rough with memory. "I refused, told my captain it was murder, not war. He threatened court-martial, said I'd hang for disobedience. But you left anyway. Couldn't stay. Couldn't be part of that." Eli's jaw clenched. "They attacked at dawn, killed women, children, old men, cut them down while they ran. I heard about it later, in a mining camp. Over 100 dead, most of them innocents." Clara took his hand, feeling the weight of his guilt and grief. "You couldn't have stopped it." "No, but I didn't participate. That's all I could do, refuse to bloody my hands with innocent lives." He looked at her then, eyes haunted. "Morrison asked for a deal. Part of me wanted to say yes, just to ensure he'd testify against Boyd. But then I thought about Thomas, about you, about justice. Some things shouldn't be bargained away." "You did right," Clara said firmly. "Thomas deserves justice, not deals." That night, as Clara tended Eli's shoulder, redressing the wound with gentle hands, she marveled at the turn her life had taken. Months ago, she'd been alone, fighting just to survive each day. Now she had Eli, had neighbors who'd risked their lives for her, had hope for a future she'd never dared imagine. "Marry me," Eli said suddenly. Clara's hand stilled. "What?" "Marry me," he repeated, turning to face her. "I know it's soon. No folks will talk about propriety in mourning periods. But we've faced death together. Clara. Seems foolish to waste time worrying about what's proper." Clara's throat tightened. "Is this because we've been together?" "No." Eli cupped her face in his hands. "This is because I love you. Because I want to rebuild that barn with you, raise horses with you, wake up every morning knowing you're beside me. Because life's too short and too hard to face alone when you've found the person you want to face it with." Tears ran down Clara's cheeks. "People will say I'm a shameless widow, throwing myself at the first man who showed interest. Let them say it." Eli's voice was fierce. "We know the truth. We know what we've built here, what we've survived. Their opinions matter less than dust." Clara thought of Thomas, of their quiet partnership that had never quite kindled into passion. He'd been a good man, and she'd mourned him truly, but what she felt for Eli was different, a fire that warmed and consumed in equal measure. "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I'll marry you." Eli's kiss was tender, careful of his injured shoulder. When they parted, both were smiling through tears. "When?" Clara asked. "Soon as this trial's done and Boyd's sentenced." Eli said, "Want to start our life together with no shadows hanging over us?" They made plans as the night deepened. Speaking of practical things, rebuilding the barn, acquiring new stock, perhaps adding onto the house. But beneath the practical talk was a current of joy, of two people who'd found each other against all odds. A week later, the trial began. The courthouse in Cheyenne was packed, with people standing along the walls to witness Ransom Boyd's judgment. Clara sat in the front row, Eli beside her, their hands clasped tight. Morrison testified first, his desperate bid for leniency leading him to reveal every detail of Boyd's crimes. He described how Boyd had ordered Thomas's death, how they'd waited in ambush, how Morrison himself had fired the fatal shot while Thomas's back was turned. Clara felt Eli's hand tighten on hers as Morrison spoke, grounding her against the rage that threatened to consume her. When her turn came to testify, she spoke clearly and calmly about the harassment, the threats, the burned barn. She produced Thomas's letter, evidence of Boyd's attempts to steal their land. The jury deliberated for less than an hour, guilty on all counts. Boyd's face went ashen as the judge pronounced sentence. He would hang, along with Morrison and two others directly involved in Thomas's murder. As they left the courthouse, Clara felt a chapter of her life closing. Justice had been served. Imperfect but final. Now she could look forward instead of back. "It's over," Eli said quietly. "No," Clara corrected, squeezing his hand. "It's just beginning." They returned to the ranch to find neighbors already there, organized by Sarah Morrison and the Hendricks family. Lumber for a new barn was stacked in the yard, and men were already digging foundation posts. "Figured you'd need help rebuilding," Sarah said with a smile. "Community takes care of its own." Clara felt tears threaten again, but they were tears of gratitude now. She'd lost so much: Thomas, her first life, the innocence of believing in simple safety. But she'd gained more: Eli, true friends, a community that would stand together against tyranny. As the sun set on the first day of barn raising, Clara stood with Eli watching their neighbors work. Tomorrow would bring more labor, more building. Soon there would be a wedding to plan, a life to forge together. "No regrets?" Eli asked softly. Clara looked at him, this quiet, scarred man who'd arrived in a blizzard and changed everything. "Not one," she said, and meant it with her whole heart. The wind that evening was gentle, carrying the sound of hammers and friendly voices. It no longer howled with loneliness, but whispered of promises kept and futures bright with possibility. Clara leaned into Eli's warmth and smiled. They had won more than a fight against Boyd. They had won the right to hope again. Spring came early to Wyoming that year, melting snow into rushing streams and coaxing green shoots from the thawing earth. Clara stood in the doorway of the new barn. marveling at how different everything looked from that desperate winter when Eli first arrived. "Mrs. Fletcher says the school committee wants to meet with you." Eli called from where he was working with a young colt. "Seems they need a teacher for the new term." Clara smiled, watching how gentle he was with the spirited animal. "I told her I'd think about it, though I don't know how I'd find time with all these horses you keep acquiring." It was true. Word had spread that Eli Creed had a way with difficult horses, and ranchers from 3 counties now brought their problem animals to him. The corral held half a dozen horses in various stages of training, and inquiries arrived weekly. "You'd make a fine teacher," Eli said, leading the colt in a slow circle. "Those children could use someone who won't let them quit when things get hard." Clara moved to the fence, admiring the liquid grace of the young horse. "Like you didn't let me quit." "You never would have quit," Eli replied, meeting her eyes. "You just needed reminding of how strong you were." The sound of approaching wagons made them both turn. The Hendricks family was arriving for Sunday dinner, along with Sarah Morrison and her husband. These gatherings had become regular since the trial, their shared ordeal forging bonds stronger than mere neighborliness. "Clara, Mr. Creed!" young Emma Hendricks called out, jumping from the wagon before it fully stopped. "Mama made apple cake." "Mind your manners, Emma." "Mrs." Hendricks chided, though she was smiling. "How are you both? That colt's looking fine. Eli." Soon the yard was full of friendly voices. The women commandeered the kitchen while the men admired the horses and discussed the new stage line coming through Elkhorn. Children ran between the adults, their laughter bright as bird song. "Hard to believe this is the same place," Samuel Worth commented, accepting a cup of coffee from Clara. "Last winter it felt like darkness might swallow this ranch whole. Now look at it." Clara surveyed their domain, the sturdy new barn, the well-maintained house with glass in every window, the healthy stock in the pastures. But more than the physical improvements, it was the absence of fear that transformed the place. No longer did she start at every hoofbeat. No longer did she sleep with a rifle in reach. "We've been blessed," she said simply. "Blessed and determined." Sarah corrected. "Not many could have stood against Boyd the way you two did." As the afternoon wore on, conversation turned to the future. The railway was expanding west, bringing opportunities and challenges. Elkhorn was growing, with a new general store and talks of a proper school building. "Place won't be the same," one of the men grumbled. "All these newcomers, changing things." "Change isn't always bad," Eli said quietly. "Sometimes it's necessary for survival." Clara caught his eye, knowing he spoke from hard experience. They'd both changed, shaped by loss and hardship, into something stronger than they'd been alone. As the sun lowered toward the horizon, their guests began departing with promises to return next Sunday. Emma Hendricks shyly approached Clara with a small wrapped package. "Mama helped me make it," she said, "for your wedding." Clara unwrapped it carefully, revealing a delicate lace handkerchief embroidered with tiny flowers. "It's beautiful. Emma, I'll carry it with me on the day." The wedding was set for next month. A simple ceremony at the ranch with Reverend Patterson officiating. Clara had wrestled briefly with propriety. Thomas had been gone just 6 months, but Eli's words rang true. They'd faced death together. Wasting time on convention seemed foolish. After the last wagon disappeared over the rise, Clara and Eli sat on the porch steps, watching stars emerge in the darkening sky. "Regrets?" Eli asked, their familiar question. "Never," Clara answered, as always. Then, more thoughtfully, "Do you miss it, the wandering life?" Eli considered. "Sometimes I dream about the open trail. No ties, no responsibilities beyond surviving another day. But then I wake up next to you, see what we're building here, and I know I'm where I belong." Clara leaned against his shoulder. "I used to think Thomas saved me by bringing me west, giving me a new life. But really, I was just trading one kind of cage for another. It wasn't until I had to fight for this place that I understood what freedom really meant." "And what does it mean?" "Choosing your own path, even when it's hard, standing for what's right, even when you're scared. Finding someone who sees you truly and loves you anyway. She turned to look at him. You gave me that, Eli. You helped me find myself. You did the same for me, he said softly. I was a ghost when I arrived here, haunted by all the things I'd done and failed to do. You brought me back to life. They sat in comfortable silence as the night deepened around them. A coyote called in the distance, answered by another, their wild song carrying across the prairie. The stage line manager asked if we'd consider boarding horses for them. Eli mentioned, regular contract, good money. What did you tell him? That I'd discuss it with my business partner. He smiled at her surprise. This ranch is yours. Clara will always be yours. But I hoped we might run it together, as partners in everything. Equal partners. Clara agreed. In business and life. A month later, on a perfect May morning, they stood before Reverend Patterson in the ranch yard. Clara wore her best dress, a deep blue that Eli said matched the Wyoming sky, and carried Emma's handkerchief. Eli had trimmed his beard and donned a new suit that Sarah Morrison had insisted on ordering from Denver. The ceremony was simple but profound. When Reverend Patterson asked if anyone objected, old Samuel Worth stood up. I object to this taking so long, he declared. These two should have been married months ago. Now get on with it, Reverend. Laughter rippled through the gathered friends as the Reverend continued. When Eli slipped a simple gold band on Clara's finger, she thought of Thomas's ring, now tucked away in a drawer. That had been a promise of security, of predictability. This ring was a promise of partnership, of facing whatever came together. You may kiss your bride, Reverend Patterson said with a smile. Eli cupped Clara's face in his work-roughened hands. Ready for the next adventure, Mrs. Creed. Ready for anything, Mr. Creed, she replied, and sealed it with a kiss that drew cheers from their friends. The celebration lasted well into the evening. Tables groaned under the weight of food neighbors had brought. Jim Fletcher, now a reformed man who'd quit drinking and taken over as sheriff after McKenna retired, played fiddle while couples danced on the packed earth. As the party continued around them, Clara and Eli slipped away to the small rise behind the house. Thomas's grave was there, marked with a simple stone. Clara placed a small bouquet of wildflowers against it. Thank you, she said quietly, for bringing me here, for starting this journey. I hope you're at peace. Eli stood beside her, solid and comforting. He'd be glad you're happy. Any man who loved you would want that. They returned to find the dancing in full swing. Emma Hendricks ran up to them, face bright with excitement. Dance with me, Mrs. Creed. Clara let herself be pulled into the circle of dancers, laughing as Emma's enthusiasm made up for her lack of skill. When Eli cut in, taking her in his arms for a proper waltz, she felt complete in a way she'd never imagined possible. Look at them, she heard Sarah Morrison say to her husband. Love born from sorrow, strong as prairie grass. They'll last forever, those two. As the music played and stars wheeled overhead, Clara believed it. They'd survived winter storms and violent men, loneliness and loss. They'd found each other in the darkness and chosen to build something bright. The next morning, Clara woke in Eli's arms to find sunlight streaming through the windows. The house was quiet, their guests long departed, but the evidence of celebration remained. Dishes to wash, furniture to rearrange, a yard to clean. We could leave it for later, Eli suggested, trailing kisses down her neck. We could. Clara agreed, then laughed. But we won't. Too much work to do. They rose and dressed, moving into the rhythm of shared labor that had become their life. Eli tended the horses while Clara organized the house. They met for the noon meal, discussing plans for expanding the corral and possibly adding a second well. The stage line contract came through, Eli told her. If we take it, we'll need to hire help. The widow Martinez has a son looking for work. Clara said, he's young but willing to learn. They continued planning. Two souls who'd found their match in ambition and affection. As afternoon shadows lengthened, they walked out to survey their domain, the ranch that had cost so much and given back even more. Next year we could add on to the house. Clara mused. If the horse training keeps growing, when, Eli corrected. When it keeps growing. I have faith in us. Clara smiled, threading her fingers through his. So do I. They stood together as the sun set over their land, painting the sky in shades of rose and gold. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, new opportunities. But tonight, they were simply Eli and Clara Creed, partners in the grand adventure of life. In the distance, a meadowlark sang its evening song, sweet and clear and full of promise. Clara listened, feeling her heart echo the melody. She'd lost a husband to violence and found a love in the aftermath. She'd fought for her home and discovered her strength. She'd opened her guarded heart and found it could hold more joy than she'd ever imagined. No regrets? Eli asked one more time. Not one. Clara answered, and knew she'd spend the rest of her life grateful for the blizzard that brought him to her door. The stars emerged one by one, bearing witness to their love, a love forged in hardship, tested by fire, and strong enough to last through whatever storms might come. On the Wyoming frontier, where life was harsh but hearts could be true, Eli and Clara Creed had found their forever. Thank you so much for listening to this story of love and survival in the Old West. If you're enjoying these tales from the frontier, I'd love to know where you're listening from. Leave a comment below and let's connect across the miles, just like the riders of the Old West connected distant towns. Don't forget to subscribe to Wild West Campfire for more stories of courage, romance, and adventure from the American frontier. Share your thoughts about Clara and Eli's journey. Did their love story touch your heart as much as it touched mine? Until next time, partners, keep riding tall in the saddle.